Imagine walking into a place where your dreams are supposed to come true, where you're finally given the opportunity to shine. You've worked tirelessly, overcome obstacles, and now you're about to step into the world you've always dreamed of. But instead of recognition, you're met with suspicion and prejudice. Meet Mark, a young man whose passion for aviation has driven him to reach the doors of Horizon Airlines. He's earned his spot, but when he steps into the pilot's lounge, everything changes. In an instant, his dreams are put on the line. What happens when your worth is judged by the color of your skin and not the effort you've put in? This is the story of resilience, courage, and the fight for justice. Will Mark let one person's prejudice define his future, or will he rise above and prove that his dream is worth fighting for? Stay tuned to hear how his journey unfolds, because this is a story that's bound to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about ambition and justice. Don't miss out. Mark had dreamed of this day for as long as he could remember. Standing in the elegant executive lounge at Horizon Aviation, he couldn't help but smile. His heart raced with excitement, but also a tinge of nervousness. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, his chance to step into the world of aviation. He had earned this moment through hard work, determination, and an essay that showcased his passion for flying. It was supposed to be a day of recognition, of meeting the pilots who inspired him. But as he settled into the plush armchair, the weight of the moment began to settle on him. This was no ordinary lounge. It was reserved for the most respected professionals in aviation, people who had spent years in the skies. Mark glanced around, trying to calm his nerves. He was just waiting for his guide, a member of the HR department, to return. The lounge was quiet, the hum of air conditioning the only sound filling the room. Suddenly, the door swung open. A tall woman in a sharp suit entered, her eyes immediately scanning the room. Her cold gaze landed on Mark, and he instinctively stood up, his heart skipping a beat. He had read about her, the senior officer, Catherine Blackwell, known for her no-nonsense attitude. Mark took a deep breath, forcing a smile as she walked toward him. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. Mark froze for a moment, the excitement he had felt moments ago now replaced by confusion. I'm Mark Thompson. I'm part of the VIP tour for Horizon Aviation. I'm just waiting for my guide," he said, his voice trembling. Officer Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "VIP tour?" she repeated, her lips curling into a sneer. "This lounge is for employees only. Get out." Mark's heart sank. "But I was told—" "I don't care what you were told," she interrupted, her voice icy and unwavering. "Get out, now." Mark stood there stunned, his mind racing. How could this be happening? He had done everything right. He had earned this moment. He reached for his ID badge, pulling it from his pocket. "I have the ID," he said, his voice shaking. "Miss Reynolds from HR gave it to me. I was allowed to wait here." Officer Blackwell took the badge from his hand, flipping it over with a look of disdain. "This looks fake," she said, her tone cold and accusatory. "I knew it. A kid like you doesn't belong here." The words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to explain, but Officer Blackwell was already speaking into her radio. "Security, I need backup. We have an intruder here with a fake ID. This is a breach of security." Mark stood frozen, his mind spinning. What was happening? How could this be happening to him? The door to the lounge swung open again, and Mark could hear the approaching footsteps of airport security. His chest tightened with dread. He had come here with so much hope, and now it was all slipping away. Mark's heart raced as the security officers entered the lounge, their expressions stern. The air was thick with tension, every footstep echoing through the quiet room. He could feel their eyes on him, cold and unblinking. The officers, two men dressed in dark uniforms, moved with purpose, their hands hovering near their belts as if ready for any sudden movements. The taller officer, a broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense look, turned toward Mark. "You need to come with us," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "We need to verify your identity and figure out what's going on here." Mark felt a wave of panic rising in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, his voice trembling despite his efforts. "I'm part of the Horizon Aviation program. Ms. Reynolds from HR..." "We don't need to hear your excuses," the officer cut in, his voice sharp. "You've been caught in a restricted area. That's enough to warrant a full search." Mark's mind whirled. This couldn't be happening. He was just a young man trying to make his dream come true. He had never imagined that a simple misunderstanding could spiral into something this serious. "Please just call Ms. Reynolds," Mark pleaded, his throat tight with fear. "She'll verify everything. I'm not lying. I have nothing to hide." But Officer Blackwell, still standing by the door with her arms crossed, scoffed. "Do you think we're going to take your word for it?" she sneered. "I've seen this before. People trying to sneak into places they don't belong. I don't trust you." The officers exchanged a brief glance before turning their attention back to Mark. The taller officer motioned for him to step forward. "Let's go," he said, his tone final. "We'll sort this out somewhere else." Mark's legs felt like lead as he followed the officers out of the lounge. Every step felt like an eternity, the hallway stretching out before him as if it were an endless tunnel. His breath came in shallow gasps, his hands clammy. He had no idea what was happening or how it had escalated so quickly. One minute he was excited, ready to embrace his future in aviation. The next he was being escorted by airport security as though he were a criminal. As they reached the security checkpoint, Mark could hear voices murmuring in the background. His mind raced as he wondered if anyone would come to his defense. But when he looked around, no one spoke up. No one came to his aid. He was completely alone. The officers led him to a small room at the back of the airport, away from the public eye. Mark was asked to stand against the wall as they began to search him. The officer who had first spoken to him rifled through his pockets, his movements mechanical. Mark could feel the cold eyes of Officer Blackwell on him the entire time, her gaze unrelenting. "Empty your pockets," the officer ordered. Mark obeyed, pulling out his phone and wallet, his hands shaking. He placed them on the table in front of him, hoping that once they saw the truth, this nightmare would end. But Officer Blackwell was having none of it. "I told you," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is a serious security breach. We can't take any chances with people like you." Mark clenched his jaw, biting back the frustration that was threatening to boil over. He had been through so much just to get here. The countless hours spent studying aviation, the sleepless nights writing essays, the endless self-doubt he had fought to overcome. And now all of that was being reduced to nothing because of a baseless accusation. As the officers continued their search, Mark couldn't help but think of the words his father had once told him. "The world will test you, son, but you can't let it define you. You have to keep pushing forward." He had never understood those words fully until now. But standing there, humiliated and shaken to his core, he finally understood what his father had meant. This was the test. And it wasn't just about aviation. It was about everything he had worked for, everything he believed in. Finally, the officer in charge stepped back and held up Mark's ID badge. "This is fake," he said again, his voice filled with certainty. "There's no way you could have gotten into this restricted area with this ID. It doesn't match anything in our system." Mark's heart dropped. The ID was real. It had been issued by HR. He had earned it. But no matter how much he explained, no one seemed to believe him. "It's a fake. Get him out of here," Officer Blackwell ordered, her voice cold. "We'll deal with him later." Mark stood frozen, his mind racing. What had he done wrong? Why was this happening to him? He wanted to scream, to shout, to make them understand. But he couldn't. He was powerless. As the officers moved to escort him out, Mark caught a glimpse of the lounge through the small window in the door. He saw the pilots, the people he had looked up to, watching him with curious, judgmental eyes. The same people he had dreamed of joining one day, and in that moment, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was losing everything, his dream, his dignity, his future, all because of a single moment, a single misunderstanding. Mark's mind spun as the security officers led him down the narrow corridor. His body moved mechanically, each step feeling heavier than the last. The faint murmur of voices from the lounge grew quieter, with each passing moment, until it was nothing more than a distant hum. The cold, sterile walls of the airport seemed to close in on him, suffocating his thoughts and leaving him with nothing but fear and confusion. As they reached the security office, Mark could feel the heat of humiliation rising in his chest. He had tried to stay calm, tried to reason with them, but now it was clear that his words meant nothing. He was just another suspect, another black kid who didn't belong in a space reserved for the elite. Inside the small room, a plain desk sat against the wall with a few chairs scattered around it. One of the officers motioned for Mark to sit in one of the chairs, his hand resting on the table like a heavy weight. The second officer stood by the door, his eyes never leaving Mark's face. Officer Blackwell remained silent, her presence looming over him like an unyielding shadow. Mark's heart thudded in his chest, each beat echoing in the silence of the room. He wanted to scream, to demand that they believe him, but he knew better. No amount of pleading would change the harsh reality he was facing. It was like the walls had been built not just to contain the space, but to contain him, his dreams, his hope, his future. All of it seemed to be trapped in this suffocating place. Officer Blackwell finally broke the silence, her voice cold and detached. "You're lucky this isn't worse. We could have had you arrested for trespassing." Mark looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't trespass. I'm part of the Horizon Aviation program. I'm supposed to be here." Officer Blackwell didn't respond right away. She simply stood there, her arms crossed tightly, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Mark wondered if she even cared about the truth. It was as if his story had already been written in her mind, and no amount of facts could change it. The officer at the door, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. "We're going to have to contact HR and verify everything. But let me make it clear, kid. This could get a lot worse for you if they don't back up your story." Mark's chest tightened at the officer's words. He had no idea what he had done to deserve this kind of treatment. All he had ever wanted was to fly, to be a part of the world of aviation that he had loved since childhood. And now it seemed as though that dream was slipping through his fingers, just because of a few words from one person who had already judged him. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Mark sat there in silence, his hands clenched into fists in his lap. He tried to focus on his breathing, to calm the storm that raged inside him, but it was no use. The anger was too strong, the injustice too real. After what felt like an age, the officer who had been speaking earlier finally picked up the phone on the desk. "We'll make a call," he said curtly, dialing a number and holding the receiver to his ear. Mark watched, his stomach twisting with dread. Every second felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment when the truth, or what they deemed the truth, would finally be revealed. Would HR back him up? Would they even care? As the phone rang, Officer Blackwell's eyes remained fixed on Mark. "You know," she said softly, her voice dripping with condescension, "I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've seen plenty of people like you. They think they can just walk into places they don't belong and somehow get away with it. But there's no getting away with it here. Not with me." Mark's chest tightened, and he forced himself to meet her gaze. "I didn't do anything wrong," he repeated, his voice steadier this time. "I don't deserve this." Officer Blackwell's lips curled into a thin smile, but it was far from comforting. It was a smile that held no warmth, no empathy, just cold, calculated judgment. "That's what they all say," she said, "but we all know that actions speak louder than words." Mark's heart dropped. The words she said stung, but it was the finality in her tone that hit hardest. It was as if she had already decided his fate, as if everything about him, his background, his dreams, his efforts, meant nothing. The phone rang once more, and Officer Blackwell answered it quickly, her eyes never leaving Mark. She spoke for a few moments in clipped tones, before hanging up and placing the receiver back down with a sharp click. "Well," she said, finally breaking her silence, "it looks like HR is backing you up, for now. But don't think this is over. You're on thin ice, kid, and I'm not sure how much longer we're going to put up with your story." Mark stood up abruptly, the anger bubbling to the surface once again. "You don't know me," he said, his voice low but steady. "You have no idea what I've been through to get here. I'm not going anywhere." Officer Blackwell raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. You're lucky they didn't press charges, but next time, I won't be so kind. As Mark was escorted out of the security office, he felt the weight of the entire situation pressing down on him. The words of Officer Blackwell echoed in his mind. Was this the world he had dreamed of? A place where people like him were always judged, always viewed as outsiders? He had no answers, only the crushing realization that his dream, once so close, now seemed farther away than ever before. Mark stepped back into the main terminal, his heart still racing, his thoughts clouded with confusion and anger. The world around him seemed a blur. He could hear the soft hum of the airport, the occasional announcement over the speakers, but it all felt distant, almost like he was in a dream, a nightmare, and he couldn't wake up. The security officers had released him after the phone call with HR, but not without leaving him with a sense of humiliation he couldn't shake off. He walked through the terminal, his shoulders hunched, his head low. He couldn't help but feel like he was being watched, like everyone around him knew what had just happened, and they were silently judging him too. He made his way to the nearest bench, sitting down heavily. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen, hoping for some sign of relief, some message from his father. But there was nothing. No texts, no missed calls, just the constant blinking cursor of his own anxiety. Mark's thoughts spiraled. He had worked so hard to get here. Every late night, every early morning, every sacrifice had led to this one moment. He had proven his worth, fought against the odds, and now it felt like it was all slipping away because of one woman's prejudice. His fingers trembled as he typed a quick message to his father, explaining the situation, but before he could send it, he paused. What would his father think? Would he understand the gravity of what had just happened? Would he believe him? Mark bit his lip, his thumb hovering over the send button. He had no idea what would happen next. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the figure approaching him until a familiar voice called his name. Mark? He looked up, startled. Standing before him was Miss Reynolds, the HR representative who had initially brought him to the lounge. Her face was a mixture of concern and apology, and she quickly sat down next to him. I'm so sorry, she said softly. I didn't know what was happening. They told me you were taken into security, but I had no idea what was going on. Mark felt a mix of relief and frustration. She was here, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. It's not your fault, he said quietly, shaking his head. It's just, I don't know what happened. Everything was fine, and then... He trailed off, unable to find the words. His emotions were raw, the hurt too fresh. Ms. Reynolds placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. I don't want you to think that what happened reflects on you. I've worked here for years, and I know how hard you've worked to get into this program. But you need to understand, Mark. Sometimes people make assumptions. They see someone like you, and they think they know everything about you. Mark's throat tightened. So, what? This is just how it's going to be. Because of the color of my skin, I'm always going to be judged. Ms. Reynolds sighed, her eyes softening with empathy. I wish I could say otherwise, but I've seen it happen time and time again. People are quick to judge, and when you don't fit into the mold they expect, it's easy for them to see you as a threat. Mark's jaw clenched. So what now? I'm supposed to just accept it? Let them win? She shook her head firmly. You don't have to accept it, but you have to understand that this fight won't be easy. You have to be stronger than they think you are. Mark looked at her, a faint glimmer of hope stirring within him. What are you saying? I'm saying that this isn't the end, Mark. You've worked too hard, and you've come too far to let one person's prejudice stand in your way. If you're willing to fight for it, I'll help you, but it's going to take everything you've got. For the first time since the incident, Mark felt a spark of something more than frustration, something like determination. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe this was just another obstacle, one he had to face and overcome. He straightened up, the weight on his shoulders feeling slightly lighter. I'm in. I won't let them define me. I'm going to prove I belong here. Ms. Reynolds smiled. That's the spirit. We'll make sure your story is heard, and we'll get to the bottom of this. But remember, this isn't just about the program. It's about showing everyone that you deserve a seat at the table. Mark nodded, his resolve firming with each passing moment. He had dreamed of this. He had worked for it. And no matter what happened, he wasn't going to let one person's bias take it away from him. As he stood up, ready to face whatever came next, Mark realized something profound. His dream had always been about the sky, about the planes, about flying. But now it was about something more. It was about fighting for his right to be there, fighting to show the world who he was, and proving that nothing, not even prejudice, could stop him. Days passed in a blur, and Mark found himself at the center of a storm he had never anticipated. The small victory from Ms. Reynolds' promise had not been easy to hold on to. Every moment he spent waiting for things to resolve felt like a test of his patience. He had sent emails, made phone calls, and still, there was no word from the higher-ups. The feeling of helplessness would wash over him time and time again, making him wonder if he had made a mistake in thinking that things would change. The airport had become a place of constant reminders of the injustice he faced. He could still hear the words of Officer Blackwell echoing in his mind, could still feel the sting of being judged by his appearance rather than his abilities. But as the days wore on, something in him shifted. Each moment of doubt was met with an equal force of resolve. He could feel it now. He wasn't going to let this define him. This was his fight, and he was going to see it through. One afternoon, Mark received an email from Ms. Reynolds. His heart skipped a beat as he opened it, hoping, praying that this was it, that something had finally happened. The message was short, but the words were like a breath of fresh air. Mark, I've spoken with the management, and they've agreed to take another look at the situation. They want to meet with you and hear your side. We've got your back. Stay strong. The relief was almost overwhelming. It wasn't the final answer, but it was a sign that the tide was beginning to turn. Mark spent the next few days preparing himself. This meeting was crucial. This was his chance to speak his truth, to show them that he wasn't the person they had made him out to be. He wasn't just a young man with a dream. He was someone who had earned his place, who deserved to be heard. The day of the meeting arrived. Mark walked into the conference room with his head held high, his posture straight, his nerves under control. He had fought for this moment, and now he was going to take full advantage of it. Ms. Reynolds was there, standing beside him, ready to support him every step of the way. The room was filled with senior management, each one looking at him as if they were studying him, judging him. For a brief moment, Mark felt that old fear creeping up his spine, the familiar sensation of being scrutinized, reduced to nothing but his outward appearance. But this time, he was ready. He would not let their gaze shake him. Mark, we've heard a lot about the incident, and we wanted to give you a chance to tell us your side, one of the senior executives said. His tone was calm, but there was an underlying sharpness to it. Explain to us what happened. Mark took a deep breath. This was his moment. This was his chance to speak the truth, to fight for what was right. I was brought here by Ms. Reynolds for the Horizon Aviation program. I had every right to be in that lounge. When Officer Blackwell saw me, she didn't ask me for my ID or try to understand who I was. Instead, she made assumptions based on my appearance. I wasn't treated like a person, like someone who had worked hard to be here. I was treated like an intruder. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. He could see the executives listening, their expressions softening ever so slightly. I've spent my life working towards this. I've sacrificed. I've studied. I've done everything it takes to get here. And I won't let one person's prejudice stand in the way of my dream. There was a long silence. Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he held his ground, standing tall in the face of their scrutiny. After what felt like an eternity, the senior executive who had spoken earlier nodded slowly. "We understand," he said, "and we're sorry for what happened. It's clear that there was a mistake. We'll be taking action to ensure this doesn't happen again, and we're offering you a chance to continue in the program." The words felt like a weight lifting off Mark's shoulders. It wasn't just the offer that made him feel lighter. It was the acknowledgement, the validation of everything he had been fighting for. He had been heard. He had been believed. As he left the meeting, Ms. Reynolds by his side, Mark allowed himself to smile for the first time in weeks. The road ahead was still long, but now it felt less uncertain. He had faced the prejudice, the doubt, the injustice, and he had come out stronger. He wasn't just a boy with a dream. He was a young man who had fought for his place, who had shown the world that nothing would stop him from reaching the sky. And as he stepped out of the building, he felt something shift within him. He knew without a doubt that he was going to be a pilot. Not because it had been handed to him, but because he had earned it, through every trial, every challenge, and every moment of strength. Mark had finally realized that his dream wasn't just about flying, it was about proving to himself and to the world that he belonged. The moral of Mark's story is that in life, we often face prejudice and injustice. However, what sets us apart is our courage to stand tall, speak up for ourselves, and fight for our rights. Never let others' judgments define your dreams, because you deserve to be accepted and valued for your efforts and hard work, not for your appearance or background. Thank you for following this story until the end. If you found it inspiring or enjoyed the story, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Share it with your friends so more people can benefit from this positive message. See you in the next story.